The invitation. The message arrived on a quiet California morning when the sky was still painted in pale shades of blue and orange, and the city outside Sundar Pichai's home had not fully woken up. Sundar had been sipping his usual cup of tea, the one ritual that grounded him no matter how chaotic the world became. His phone buzzed softly, not with the usual flood of emails or meeting reminders, but with a simple, carefully worded note delivered through official channels. At first he thought it was just another formal request, something ceremonial that came with being the CEO of one of the world's most influential companies. But as his eyes scanned the message, his breath caught in his chest. It was an invitation, not from a business leader, not from a global summit, not from another head of state requesting a keynote. This was different. It was from Modi ji himself. A private dinner. No press, no entourage, no cameras. Just the two of them. In Delhi, Sundar's hand trembled slightly as he set the phone down on the wooden table. He tried to steady his breath, but questions already filled his mind. Why him? What did the Prime Minister of India want to say that required secrecy, that required privacy away from the flashing lights and microphones? Sundar had attended public events with world leaders. Before, he had spoken in front of packed auditoriums filled with ministers, ambassadors, and corporate giants, but never had he received a request that felt this personal, this weighty. His wife noticed the change in his face as she entered the kitchen. She asked gently what had happened, and Sundar only whispered, "It's Modi ji. He wants to meet me, alone." She didn't say much at first. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder and he could feel the silent weight of her support, mixed with her own unspoken worry. She knew that moments like this could change everything, because power and responsibility never traveled lightly, and a meeting like this one could shape not only careers, but entire futures. Sundar sat there for a long while, his tea growing cold. His mind drifted uninvited back to his childhood in Chennai. He could still picture the small house where he grew up, the cramped rooms, the way the walls seemed too thin to contain all the dreams he carried. His father had been an electrical engineer, his mother a stenographer, and together they had provided not with wealth but with something far greater. The belief that education, humility, and persistence could open doors that once seemed impossible. Sundar remembered the nights when electricity would go out, and the family would sit together under the dim glow of a single kerosene lamp. He remembered how his father, tired from long hours of work, would still patiently explain how a circuit board functioned, or why a transistor could change the course of an entire system. And now here he was, thousands of miles away from that small home, being called back to his homeland. Not as a boy with dreams, but as a man who had built a life at the crossroads of technology and humanity. Still, the boy in him wondered, was he truly ready for what awaited? The days leading up to the dinner were heavy with anticipation. Sundar prepared himself as best as he could, though no preparation seemed enough. He kept wondering what Modi ji might want. Was it about India's digital future, about policies, about collaboration? Or was it something deeper, something beyond the usual discussions of data, networks, and infrastructure? Sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, he found himself staring at the ceiling, asking silent questions he could not answer. Finally, the day arrived. As the plane descended into Delhi, Sundar pressed his forehead gently against the window, watching the city lights shimmer below. It was a city he knew well, yet one that always seemed to change each time he returned. He thought of the millions of people moving through its streets, the voices, the stories, the struggles, and the hopes. Somewhere within that vast ocean of lives, his own story had been shaped, nurtured, and sent out into the world, and now perhaps the world was calling him back. The car that met him at the airport was simple, almost understated, but the presence of quiet security was unmistakable. As they drove through the streets, Sundar's mind wandered again to his father, who would have marveled at the thought of his son being escorted for a private dinner with the Prime Minister. His father had always taught him that respect was not demanded but earned, and that true greatness lay not in wealth or fame but in the quiet strength of character. Sundar carried those lessons like armor, especially now when uncertainty swirled around him like an unseen storm. The dinner was held at a discreet residence, not the grand halls one might expect. The building was elegant but unpretentious, its walls carrying the weight of history, its silence broken only by the occasional sound of footsteps from staff who moved with calm precision. Sundar was led into a room where the table was set not for many but for two. The atmosphere felt almost intimate, almost fragile, as if the very air carried secrets waiting to be spoken. Then, Modi ji entered. His presence filled the room immediately, calm yet commanding, humble yet powerful. Sundar rose to greet him, and the Prime Minister's smile was warm, his handshake firm. But behind his eyes, Sundar sensed something else, something serious, something that was not meant for casual conversation. They exchanged pleasantries at first, speaking of family, of memories, of journeys taken across oceans. But soon, the conversation deepened. Modi ji leaned forward, his voice lowering, his tone shifting from cordial to contemplative. "Sundar," he said softly, "you have carried India with you even when you walked among the most powerful in the world. I see it in the way you speak, in the way you lead. But there is something more, something only you can do. And tonight I must tell you why I asked you here." Sundar felt his pulse quicken. The weight of those words pressed against his chest. Only him, what could be so important, so urgent that it required secrecy, that it required him alone? He leaned forward listening, his mind racing, his heart steady yet heavy. The Prime Minister's voice grew quieter, more deliberate. He spoke of visions, of challenges, of hopes that stretched beyond borders. He spoke of India's role in a world where technology was not just progress but power, not just invention, but influence. His words carried both pride and urgency, and as Sundar listened, he felt the world around him narrow until there was only the table, only the voices, only the truth that was about to be revealed. And then, Modi ji paused. He looked directly into Sundar's eyes, his expression unreadable, his silence louder than any speech. He placed his hand gently on the table, leaned in, and whispered the words that froze Sundar in place. "There is something only you can do, Sundar." The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavier, as if time itself had paused. Sundar's mind spun with questions, with fear, with anticipation. What could it be? What burden was about to be placed upon him? What choice would he be forced to make? The answers hung just beyond reach, waiting for the moment when silence would break into revelation. The secret request, the silence that followed Modi ji's words, stretched longer than Sundar expected. He could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the soft clink of cutlery as a staff member placed dishes gently on the table, and then quietly left the room, leaving them alone again. Sundar's heart was still racing. He wanted to ask. He wanted to break the silence, but something in Modi ji's calm eyes told him to wait. Sometimes the greatest truths arrived slowly, not as lightning but as a steady flame. Finally, Modi ji spoke again, his voice measured but carrying the weight of a man who had lived through storms and victories, losses and triumphs. "Sundar," he said, "you know better than most how technology has reshaped the world. You have seen it change lives, create opportunities, and connect people in ways once unthinkable. But you also know the other side. Technology can divide as much as it unites. It can create walls of inequality as easily as it builds bridges of hope. India stands at a turning point. We can either let others write the future for us or we can write it ourselves. And for that, I need you." The words landed heavily on Sundar. He had expected a discussion about policy or digital infrastructure, perhaps even collaboration between government and Silicon Valley. But this was different. Modi ji's tone was not about business, not about deals. It was about destiny. As Sundar listened, flashes of his own journey flickered across his mind like old film reels. He remembered arriving in America as a young student with little more than a suitcase and the burning desire to learn. He remembered nights spent in small dorm rooms, writing code until his eyes blurred, surviving on instant noodles and endless cups of tea. He remembered the early days at Google when he was just one engineer among thousands, quietly building, quietly proving himself, while often feeling like an outsider in a world that seemed larger than his place within it. Every step had been filled with doubt, yet he had carried on, driven by something beyond ambition. A quiet resilience. The same resilience his parents had carried through their own struggles. And now, sitting across from the leader of his homeland, he felt that same resilience stir inside him, but along with it came fear. "I don't know if I can do what you are asking," Sundar admitted softly. His voice cracked, not out of weakness, but out of the honesty that comes when the heart is laid bare. "My duty is to the company I lead. My decisions affect thousands of employees, millions of users. I cannot simply act as one man even if I want to. There are responsibilities, expectations, limits." ODG nodded as if he had expected that answer. "I know," he said gently, "but sometimes, Sundar, history does not ask for permission. It calls you, whether you feel ready or not, and when it does, you must listen." He then shared something Sundar did not expect. Modi ji spoke of his own childhood, of growing up selling tea at a railway station, of watching travelers rush past, never stopping, never noticing the boy who stood there with hope in his eyes. He spoke of nights filled with uncertainty, of questions about whether his dreams had any place in a world that seemed indifferent. And then he paused, his voice dropping even lower. "Do you know what I learned from those days? I learned that struggle can either harden you or soften you. It can make you bitter, or it can make you kind. And when kindness is married to resilience, it becomes power. Not the kind of power that controls, but the kind that transforms." Sundar was stunned. He had heard stories of Modi ji's childhood before, but hearing it directly from him, in that quiet room, was different. It felt raw, intimate, like a truth shared not between a leader and a CEO, but between two sons of India who had carried their pasts into their futures. Sundar felt his chest tighten. In Modi ji's words, he saw a reflection of his own father, who had sacrificed so much to give him a chance at a life far greater than what was possible in their small home. The meal continued, though neither man seemed interested in the food. The conversation grew deeper, flowing from technology to humanity, from algorithms to dignity. Modi ji spoke of villages that still lacked internet, of children who walked miles for a chance to learn, of farmers who deserved not only tools but trust. He painted a picture of a future where India would not simply consume technology, but shape it, lead it, redefine it. "But," he added, "we cannot wait for others to give us permission. We must move now. And for that, I need your help, Sundar. Your mind, your heart, your voice." Sundar sat in silence, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. It was one thing to lead a company, to face shareholders, to answer to boards and markets. It was another to feel the gaze of an entire nation through the eyes of one man asking for something greater. Sundar wondered if he was being asked to choose between his roots and his present, between the boy who had grown up in Chennai and the man who now lived in California. Then, as the plates were cleared and the table grew bare, Modi ji reached into his pocket and pulled out a small sealed envelope. He placed it on the table between them, his hand lingering over it for a moment before pulling back. The envelope looked ordinary, plain even, yet it seemed to carry a weight that neither of them named. "Inside this letter," Modi ji said quietly, "are words meant only for you. Do not open it yet. Open it when the time is right, when your heart tells you you must. Until then, carry it with you. Let it remind you that sometimes our journeys are not just our own. Sometimes they belong to something larger." Sundar stared at the envelope, his throat dry. He wanted to open it immediately, to know the truth, to understand the full measure of what Modi ji was asking. But the seriousness in the Prime Minister's voice, the gravity in his eyes stopped him. He slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket, feeling its weight against his chest. As the night ended and Sundar prepared to leave, Modi ji placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, Sundar," he said, "greatness is not in what you achieve for yourself, but in what you make possible for others. One day soon, you will be forced to decide what that means for you." Those words echoed in Sundar's mind as he stepped back into the Delhi night, the air thick with the scent of earth and the distant hum of traffic. He felt both honored and burdened, both inspired and unsettled. The envelope pressed against his chest like a heartbeat, a reminder of something waiting, something inevitable. As the car carried him away, Sundar looked out the window at the city, lights, and wondered how long he could carry the secret. How long before the letter demanded to be opened? How long before the choice that Modi ji had hinted at would come crashing into his life? And somewhere deep inside, he knew that when that moment came, nothing would ever be the same again. The burden of choice. The flight back to California was long, but Sundar barely noticed the hours slipping by. He sat by the window as the plane cut through the night sky, the world below hidden in layers of cloud and darkness. His eyes were open, but his mind was somewhere else, circling endlessly around the same thought: the letter. It rested in his jacket pocket, close to his chest, the paper light in weight, yet impossibly heavy in meaning. He touched it from time to time as if to confirm it was still there, as if to reassure himself that this strange burden had not disappeared in a dream. He replayed the dinner again and again. Modi ji's steady eyes, his words about kindness and resilience, his hand placing the envelope on the table with deliberate care. Sundar had been in countless meetings with leaders, visionaries, and thinkers across the globe, but nothing had ever unsettled him like that moment. It was not the grandeur of politics, not the spectacle of power. It was intimate, personal, and filled with an urgency he could not ignore. But as the wheels touched down in San Francisco and the familiar rhythm of his life at Google called him back, Sundar realized the true weight of the burden. Every day at the office brought new challenges: product deadlines, market pressures, debates about ethics and artificial intelligence, questions from the board about growth and competition. These were enormous responsibilities already, the kind that demanded all of him, the kind that left no space for secrets carried in jacket pockets. Yet now, layered on top, was something else, something unspoken, something that belonged not just to him but to millions of people whose faces he could not even see. He tried to bury himself in work, but it didn't help. During meetings, his mind drifted back to the envelope. During presentations, his voice carried words his heart wasn't in. Even at home, sitting across from his wife at the dinner table, he felt distracted, restless, like a man living in two worlds at once. One evening, unable to hold it in, he finally spoke to her. He did not tell her what was inside the envelope because he himself didn't know, but he told her about the dinner, about Modi ji's words, about the strange request to carry something sealed and wait until the right moment to open it. She listened quietly, her eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she reached across the table, took his hand, and said softly, "Sometimes life gives you a responsibility before you feel ready for it. Maybe this is one of those times. Don't be afraid of the weight, Sundar. You've carried heavier burdens than you realize." Her words comforted him, but they also deepened the question inside him. What if the letter demanded something impossible? What if it forced him to choose between his role at Google and his loyalty to India? What if it carried a responsibility he wasn't strong enough to bear? Weeks passed, and the envelope remained unopened. Sundar kept it in a drawer in his study, away from sight but never far from thought. Sometimes, late at night, he would open the drawer, take it out, and stare at it under the soft glow of the lamp. The seal remained unbroken, the handwriting plain, giving no clue about the storm it contained. More than once he nearly tore it open, but each time something stopped him. Maybe fear, maybe respect, maybe the haunting echo of Modi ji's words. Open it when the time is right, and then came the crisis. It began with whispers inside Google, discussions about a project that threatened to push the boundaries of technology into dangerous territory. A group of engineers raised alarms, worried that the work could harm millions if misused. The board wanted results. The shareholders wanted growth, and the pressure mounted on Sundar to make a decision that could shape the company's future. As the arguments grew louder and the tension thicker, Sundar felt the envelope's weight more than ever. In heated meetings, he watched people clash, voices rising, trust fraying. Some argued for speed, for dominance in the market, for the power that came with being first. Others pleaded for caution, for responsibility, for restraint. Sundar listened, but deep inside, he felt torn apart. Every path carried risk. Every choice carried consequences. One night, exhausted after hours of debate, he sat alone in his office. The city lights of Silicon Valley flickered beyond the glass walls, and the silence of the building pressed against him. He pulled open the drawer and took out the envelope once more. His hand shook as he held it, the paper cool against his skin. He stared at it for a long time, his breath uneven, his thoughts colliding like waves in a storm. He thought of his father's sacrifices, of the nights under a kerosene lamp, of the lessons about humility and respect. He thought of Modi Ji's childhood story, of selling tea at the railway station, of learning that kindness and resilience together could change the world. He thought of the faces of the engineers who had come to him with fear in their eyes, desperate for him to listen. And then, for the first time, Sundar felt something clear inside him. A pull, a certainty, a voice that whispered, "The time is right." He tore the envelope open. His hands trembled as he pulled out the folded sheet of paper inside. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence deafening, as if the entire world leaned in to witness what came next. His eyes moved across the page, and with each word, his pulse quickened. Whatever was written there, whatever truth Modi Ji had hidden in those lines, it would change everything. The burden of choice. The days after his return from Delhi were filled with the familiar rhythm of meetings, strategy sessions, and the relentless pace of Silicon Valley. But Sundar felt like a man walking through two worlds at once. On the surface, he was the calm, measured CEO that everyone knew, answering questions from the board with precision, guiding his teams through complex challenges, smiling politely during interviews. Yet beneath that surface, in the quiet corners of his mind, the envelope pulsed like a hidden heartbeat, reminding him that he carried something far beyond quarterly reports and product launches. He had tucked the letter into a drawer in his study, at home, but it never truly left him. He felt its presence even when he wasn't near it, as if the words locked inside had already begun to shape him. He remembered Modi Ji's voice so vividly, steady, unhurried, filled with a kind of weight that came not from authority alone but from lived struggle. "Open it when the time is right," the Prime Minister had said. Those words played in his mind like an echo he couldn't silence. At first, Sundar tried to push the thoughts away. He told himself he had more urgent matters to focus on: investor, expectations, competition from rivals, the next steps in artificial intelligence research. These were tangible, immediate, and measurable. They were problems he knew how to solve. But the truth was, no matter how many hours he poured into work, no matter how many numbers he studied or presentations he prepared, the question of the letter remained. Sometimes, in the middle of a presentation, his eyes would blur, and he'd imagine the envelope sitting in his drawer waiting patiently, whispering to him that sooner or later he would have to face it. His family noticed the change. His wife, who knew his silences better than anyone, would sometimes find him staring out the window late at night, his hands folded together, his face tight with thought. Once, she asked him gently, "Are you carrying something you haven't spoken about?" Sundar hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything, but the promise he had made, to open it only when the time was right, held him back. So he said softly, "There are moments when life gives you a choice you don't feel ready for. I think I'm standing at the edge of one now." She didn't press further. She only placed her hand over his, and that simple gesture gave him the comfort of knowing he wasn't alone, even if the burden felt like his alone to carry. Weeks turned into months, and the pressure inside Google began to rise. Whispers of a controversial new project spread across teams. Some engineers believed it could revolutionize industries, make life easier for millions, and secure the company's dominance for years to come. Others feared it would open doors that should remain closed, creating risks too great to control. Reports reached Sundar of heated arguments in conference rooms, of late-night emails filled with fear, of resignations quietly tendered by those who felt unheard. The board wanted results. Shareholders demanded growth. Every eye turned to Sundar, expecting him to provide clarity, to lead, to decide. But inside, Sundar felt a storm gathering. The conflict around him mirrored the conflict within him. On one hand, he had built his life on responsibility, on proving himself worthy of the trust placed in him by a company that now held influence over billions of lives. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the words of Modi ji about kindness, resilience, and the need for India, for the world, to shape its own destiny rather than be shaped by forces blind to human dignity. The burden grew heavier. Sometimes, Sundar would retreat to his study late at night, open the drawer and take out the envelope. He would hold it under the light of the lamp, staring at the unbroken seal, feeling his breath quicken. Each time he thought, maybe tonight is the night. Yet each time something inside him hesitated. What if opening it meant stepping onto a path he could not turn back from? What if the letter demanded a sacrifice greater than he was willing to give? And then the crisis came to a head. A major decision loomed over the company, one that could not be postponed, one that demanded an answer. The arguments within Google reached a fever pitch, spilling out of conference rooms into public whispers. Journalists caught wind of the unrest. Politicians began asking questions. Sundar knew the choice would not only define the future of the company, but would also ripple far beyond, affecting governments, economies, and ordinary people who had never even heard his name. The weight was crushing. Sundar found himself awake at 3 a.m, sitting in silence while the city outside his window slept. The lights of San Francisco glittered in the distance, but he felt as if he were staring into darkness. He thought of his father, who had worked tirelessly with quiet dignity, never seeking recognition, only doing what needed to be done. He thought of the boy he once was, walking through the narrow lanes of Chennai, dreaming of a life he could barely imagine, never knowing that one day he would be asked to carry choices that could shape the world. His hand shook as he opened the drawer one final time. The envelope lay there, waiting, patient as ever. He picked it up, and this time, he did not put it back. He sat at his desk, the paper cool against his skin, his breath shallow. He thought of Modi ji, of the dinner, of the moment when the Prime Minister had leaned forward and whispered, "There is something only you can do." He thought of the engineers who had come to him in fear, of the millions who depended on the tools his company created, of the children in villages whose futures might depend on choices made in rooms they would never enter. A clarity settled over him, fragile but undeniable. The time was right. Slowly, with trembling hands, Sundar tore open the envelope. The seal cracked, the paper unfolded, and as his eyes fell on the first line, he felt his heart pound harder than ever before. Whatever was written there, it was not just words. It was a turning point. It was the weight of history pressing into his hands. The storm. The letter trembled in Sundar's hands as though it were alive, its words carrying a weight far beyond the ink on the page. He read slowly at first, each line sinking into him, then faster, as though the urgency of what was written gripped his heart and refused to let go. Modi ji had not written in the polished style of speeches or public statements. The letter was personal, direct, raw. It spoke of India's potential not in numbers or statistics, but in people, in faces, in the quiet dignity of millions who still lived without the tools that others took for granted. It spoke of education denied because of distance, of farmers whose wisdom was rich but whose voices were unheard, of young minds brimming with ideas but silenced by lack of opportunity. And then, buried within the flowing words, came the request, not for money, not for influence, not for publicity, but for something greater. Modi ji asked Sundar to help lay the foundation of a movement that would place knowledge and technology into the hands of every child in India, not as charity, but as empowerment. A digital revolution rooted not in profit, but in dignity, in equality, in possibility. It was a vision of classrooms lit not only by electricity but by hope, of villages connected not just to networks but to futures they could shape themselves. Sundar felt his chest tighten. The enormity of the request was overwhelming. This was not a program that could be launched with a press release or a single partnership. It was a mission that would require battles against corporate interests, political obstacles, and even global powers who would see such independence as a threat. He could already hear the voices that would rise against it. Board members asking why resources should be spent on something that did not guarantee profit. Politicians questioning motives. Rivals waiting to exploit every delay and stumble. As he set the letter down, Sundar leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. Outside his office window, Silicon Valley glittered with its usual confidence, the hum of innovation, the constant race for the next big thing. But inside, Sundar felt none of that certainty. He felt the storm beginning, one that would test every part of who he was. The first wave of that storm came faster than he expected. Within weeks, internal debates at Google turned sharper. The controversial project that had already sparked unrest now demanded his decision. The board pressed him to accelerate it, to seize the advantage before competitors overtook them. "This is the future," one executive told him firmly during a meeting, his voice sharp with impatience. "If we don't lead, we will be left behind." But Sundar, hearing those words, thought not of markets or profits, but of Modi Ji's letter, of children in rural schools, of farmers watching their crops fail without access to tools that could have saved them. The engineers who opposed the project grew more desperate. Some came to Sundar in private, their voices trembling with frustration. "We trust you to protect what's right," one said, "but if you push this forward, we can't be part of it." Sundar listened, his heart heavy. He saw in their eyes the same fear that had echoed in his own chest, the fear of creating something powerful but dangerous, something that could outgrow its makers and harm the very people it was meant to help. The pressure was relentless. Newspapers caught wind of the divisions within the company. Headlines spoke of turmoil, of cracks in leadership, of questions about whether Sundar had the strength to hold the company together. He woke each morning to a flood of messages from advisors, investors, and colleagues, each demanding clarity. But clarity was the one thing he lacked. He was standing at a crossroads, and whichever path he chose would change everything. At home, the burden showed. His children noticed his silences, the way he smiled less, the way his shoulders seemed to carry a weight invisible to others. His wife reminded him gently of the man he had always been, humble, resilient, guided by kindness. "Don't let fear make the choice for you," she said softly one night. "Let your heart decide the way it always has." Her words stayed with him, but they did not make the path easier. The storm reached its peak when an anonymous leak about the controversial project hit the global press. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Headlines questioned Google's ethics, governments demanded answers. Activists protested outside offices, employees threatened mass resignations. Sundar was thrust into the center of a whirlwind he could no longer control. Cameras followed his every move. Analysts dissected every word he spoke. The calm, composed image he had built over years was suddenly tested like never before. And in the middle of that chaos, the letter's message burned brighter than ever. Modi Ji had not promised him safety or support. He had promised him only truth. That there are moments when one man must decide whether to serve his own security or the greater good. Sundar felt that moment pressing against him now, fierce and undeniable. The betrayal came when he least expected it. A colleague he had trusted for years, someone who had once stood by him through difficult decisions, secretly aligned with those pushing the project forward. Documents were leaked, internal discussions twisted, and suddenly, Sundar was portrayed as indecisive, as weak, as a leader unable to act. It cut deep, not just because of the professional damage, but because it came from someone he had believed in. He stood alone in his office late one evening, the city lights flickering in the distance, the storm outside and inside raging without pause. He opened his drawer once more and pulled out the letter, smoothing its creases with trembling hands. He read Modi Ji's words again and again, as if searching for strength in the ink itself. He knew what he had to do, but doing it would mean risking everything: his position, his reputation, his friendships, perhaps even his safety. It would mean standing against forces far greater than himself. And yet, deep inside, he also knew something else. not acting, would be a betrayal greater than any other. As dawn broke over the valley, Sundar realized the storm would not pass until he stepped into it. The sacrifice, the morning after Sundar made his decision, the world felt different. The sun still rose over Silicon Valley. The birds still scattered through the skies, and the endless hum of traffic filled the air. But inside Sundar's heart there was no ordinary rhythm. There was a silence, heavy and steady. The silence that comes when a man knows he has chosen a path that will cost him more than he can measure. He walked into the Google headquarters with calm steps, but every eye seemed to follow him. The employees who had once looked at him with quiet admiration now looked with unease, waiting for him to speak, waiting to see which side he would stand on. Whispers traveled through hallways, rumors spilled into headlines, and yet Sundar kept moving, carrying with him the clarity that had finally settled deep inside him. In a tense meeting with the board, he did what no one expected. Instead of approving the project that promised power, dominance, and profit, he stood firm and said no. His voice did not rise. It did not tremble. It was steady, measured, unshakable. "We cannot build something that we do not fully understand," he said. "We cannot release a force into the world that may harm the very people who trust us. Technology must serve humanity, not control it. If we move forward blindly, we betray that trust." The silence in the room was sharp, almost painful. Some faces turned pale, others hardened with anger. One board member leaned forward, his voice like steel. "You realize what this means, Sundar? You're risking everything. Our market share, our investors, our future." Sundar met his eyes and answered quietly, "There are futures that matter more than numbers on a screen. I would rather be remembered for protecting people than for building something dangerous." The backlash came swiftly. Newspapers called him reckless. Analysts accused him of weakness. Rivals celebrated the delay, while employees argued bitterly about whether he had saved the company's soul or destroyed its chance at leadership. In the middle of it all, Sundar stood alone, bearing the storm of criticism like a man who had already accepted the cost. But the sacrifice was not only professional. At home, his family began to feel the weight too. Strangers on the internet sent cruel words. Journalists camped outside their house, and his children asked why people seemed angry at their father. Sundar struggled to answer. He knelt beside them, his hands resting gently on their shoulders, and said, "Sometimes doing the right thing makes people angry at first, but we must still do it. One day, you'll understand why." His voice cracked as he said it, but his eyes remained steady. Friendships were tested as well. Colleagues he had trusted for years avoided him. Some even turned their backs entirely. The betrayal of one close associate, who had leaked documents against him, cut deeper than any headline ever could. Sundar found himself asking late at night if kindness had been a mistake, if trust had only left him vulnerable. Yet even in those moments he remembered his father's words, spoken long ago in their modest home in Chennai. "To be kind is never weakness. It is the hardest strength of all." Those words became his anchor. And then, in the middle of this chaos, something unexpected happened. One person he thought would never support him, a rival within the company, someone who had often challenged his ideas in public, came to him quietly one evening. She looked him in the eye and said, "You did what none of us had the courage to do. You chose people over profit. I didn't agree with you before, but now I see why it matters. You're not alone, Sundar." It was a small moment, but it lit a spark of hope inside him. Even in the storm, there were allies he had not seen before. Still, the nights grew longer, the silence heavier. Sundar spent hours at his desk staring at Modiji's letter, rereading the lines about dignity and resilience. He wondered if this was the sacrifice the Prime Minister had foreseen, if this was the burden only he could carry. He thought of the villages Modiji had spoken of the children who deserved a future brighter than the flicker of a kerosene lamp. And he told himself again and again, "If I must fall, let me fall for them." Then came the call. It was late at night. The house quiet, his family asleep. Sundar sat alone, his thoughts heavy when the phone buzzed softly. He picked it up and the familiar voice of Modi Ji came through the line. But this time, the voice was not steady and commanding. It was softer, almost trembling, as though carrying its own burden. "Sundar," Modi Ji said, "I have been watching closely. I know the storm you are walking through. I know the price you are paying. But tonight, there is something you must hear. There is more to this than you realize." Sundar froze, the words hanging in the air like a shadow. More to this? What did that mean? What truth was still hidden? What weight was yet to come? His breath caught as Modi Ji continued, his voice breaking slightly. "You must be ready because what comes next will not only test you, it will test the world around you." The line crackled, silence stretched, and in that silence Sundar felt the storm darken even further. The new dawn, the night of Modi Ji's call, lingered in Sundar's mind long after the line went silent. He sat in the darkness of his study, the glow of the city beyond his window blurred by the fog pressing against the glass. His heart beat heavily, not with fear alone, but with a strange awareness that the path he had chosen was leading him to something larger than anything he had faced before. "There is more to this than you realize," Modi Ji had said, and those words refused to leave him. Days passed, but each one carried with it a deeper tension. The world outside seemed to spin faster, louder, harsher. Critics continued their attacks, allies remained cautious, and yet Sundar felt a quiet shift inside himself. He was no longer the man torn between two choices. He had already sacrificed his safety, his comfort, his reputation for something greater. And though the cost had been heavy, it had also freed him from the fear of losing what he could no longer cling to. He walked through the halls of Google with a calm resolve, his steps steady, his eyes clear, even as storms of opinion swirled around him.